A very warm welcome to Adam's Gardening Guides and to my summer garden. Colour everywhere you look at this time of year, particularly on my patio with the Agapanthus coming to full flower, beautiful Clematis putting on a great show, the hydrangeas producing flower buds, they'll be in full flower soon. Lots of colour and interest around the garden, so lots of gardening tips and ideas for me to share with you today. So stick with me as we look at some of the jobs to do around your summer garden. This main flower border divides the top part of my garden from the bottom part. Lawn sweeps down to this main flower border. It's got a wedding cake tree in the middle of the border there, and it divides this part of the garden from the lower part where I've got my greenhouse and my fruit and my vegetables. And I want this main border to have colour for as long a season as possible. So the colour starts early in spring with the daffodils, which I've planted at the back of the border. And as we move through spring into early summer, these hardy perennials at the front grow up. I've got some geraniums in here, the lovely Geranium magnificum with its blue flowers. I've got drifts of alstroemeria. I've got some lovely astrantias, this astrantia roma coming up here. But I intersperse it with these, one of my favourites, the alliums. And these alliums, or flowering onions as they're commonly called, give you flower usually from around about end of May, maybe beginning of June through June. And I grow these so that their flowers come up through the carpet of perennials below. And in my border, I think they do help not only layer on that welcome flower colour at the beginning of June, like this beautiful Allium Christophii, and the gladiator one popping up in here as well, giving you several weeks of colour, most welcomed by the bees, which are always busy foraging around them. But also as the flowers fade, you'll get the seed heads, which you can enjoy for many more weeks. And if you want, just leave them here in the border to self-seed and produce little bulbs, which will flower in future years. I love growing hostas in pots. And on my patio, I've got 7 different varieties. Francis Williams got a big, bold, thick leaf. This nice variety called Patriot, with a broad white band around its green leaf, a little bit glaucous in places, beautiful variety. And this one called Hosta June, ideal for a pot, nice and compact. Had these in pots for a few years now. Tend to choose a loam based compost to grow them in, to give the compost more guts, more heart, so that the plants will grow strongly. But not only do I love hostas, so do slugs and snails. So what can you do to make sure that the hosta leaves stay free from damage through the year, rather than finding that they've turned into a network of lace holes chewed away by slugs and snails feeding at night? Well, there are a number of things you can do actually. Growing hostas in pots can help to reduce infestation from slugs and snails. If you planted these varieties in your borders, they're probably much more likely to be attacked. So growing them in pots in the first place can be a good start. The other thing I'm going to try is putting some of this copper tape around the rim of my hosta pots. Now this tape is going to be sticky on one side and it's got a copper coating on the other. And it is said that if slugs or snails crawl up the sides of the pots and touch the copper, they get a tingling sensation and they'll turn tail and go away, rather than go across the copper to reach the plant. So I'm going to try putting some of this around the rim of my pots and just see whether or not it does do the job of keeping slugs and snails away. So all you've got to do is to get the tape itself, remove the backing layer, which reveals the sticky coating underneath, and just start putting this just bit by bit around the rim of your pot. I'm going to put it on this pot just at the lip of the pot itself. It sticks as it goes, so just put it onto the side of the pot and stick it down. just ease it on gently, peeling back the backing layer to reveal the glue, and then pushing it down as neatly as you possibly can. This is far easier to do if you've got a flat edge on a pot, but if you've got a curve, then I think you've just got to take your time and just see whether you can get a smooth layer. It doesn't matter if the copper tape creases a little bit in places. What you're trying to do is to make sure that you've got a full barrier right the way around the rim of your pot. And once you get to the end, just overlap the copper tape a little bit on that final bit there and snip that away. Cuts easily with scissors, they're nice and smooth. And now we've got a full layer of copper right the way around we're in the pot. I'm just hoping that slugs and snails coming up, touching the copper, will turn tail and go away, and hopefully you will keep these beautiful leaves, the lovely foliage of Hosta June, clean and pristine and free from holes this summer. I've got my newly planted salads here outside. It's always worth keeping an eye among them because you never know what you might find. And of course, the slugs and snails adore eating salads, and here we are. Just if you can find them, you can move them or get rid of them, but sometimes these snails are hiding away during the day, and it's worth coming out at night and seeing if you can find any. If your garden is anything like mine, it's under attack from slugs and snails. One thing I do is to pop out every night with my head torch on and just go around the lawn and the borders searching for slugs and snails, and it's surprising, night after night I'll find a few. Here some snails at the edge of my lawn, slug munching away at the colchicum plants here. Just explore your own garden. So if you can get out late in the evening when it's cooler and damper, it's surprising how many you'll find. Check over your tender plants. I'll give my hostas a good search too. It's surprising how many you will find around the garden. So this is one way to try and keep the slugs and snails from munching away your garden plants, is to go on a nightly search. Head torch is perfect for just searching them out, and any you find you can get rid of in the best way you see fit. And this plant saucer, and I place these around my garden, particularly around my crops, but it can act as a slug trap. So I check underneath it in the morning. Yes, look, I've got a couple of slugs underneath the lid here, and also a couple of slugs on the bed itself. So it's worth just putting saucers like this in amongst your crops, checking underneath them every morning. Many years ago, organic gardeners would have used a grapefruit skin for the same purpose. Eat the grapefruit, put the skin in place in the vegetable bed, check underneath it in the morning, see if you've trapped any slugs. But here we are, I've got some slugs and I can dispose of these, stop them eating my salad leaves. Once you've got rid of the slugs, just nestle the little saucer neatly in place back in the bed, and I'll check on that again tomorrow. My Agapanthus Blue Storm has flowered a bit earlier this year, starting in early June, producing these beautiful blue flowers with a dark blue stripe down each one. I grow mine in a pot. It's grown to about 2.5 foot in height, and it flowers generously right the way through for many, many weeks, producing dozens of flower spikes. And the bees adore feeding on their flowers too. Look at this one, having a really good feed. Keep it in a pot, move the pot to my unheated greenhouse for the winter, tidy it up in the spring and bring it out to enjoy my patio in the summer. It is not just the leaves that make Ascot Rainbow such a valuable hardy perennial. It's the flowers too. When I first planted this plant in my autumn winter pot arrangement. It was just a lovely crown of foliage. It contrasted well with its neighbouring plants and added that lovely zing to my winter display. It looked lovely through January and February, and as we moved through winter into March, the flowering spikes had started to develop, and they gradually move up and curl open. They look gorgeous as they're developing, and by spring they're in full flower. And now I'm in the middle of June and I've already got a beautiful crown of flowers here. The flowers are very, very delicate. There are literally thousands of flowers on this plant. They've got a little bract at their base which has got gold and green markings on it, and then the individual little flowers themselves are almost deep reddish colour. Look absolutely gorgeous, and this display will last week after week after week. I'm going to leave it in place here, enjoy this as we move through summer. But down at the base, now we can see down here, I've got the leaf stem from last year and coming out, but right the way down at the bottom of these stems I can just see some new little buds developing. So as we move through summer, what I'm going to be doing is looking at the base of the stems, watching the growth right down at the bottom, and once it is perhaps an inch or so high, I'm going to cut off all of this top growth completely, remove this and make room for the new growth to come up, and those new shoots will grow up through autumn, and as we move through to winter I'll again have a nice crown of foliage to enjoy in my display. If you've got this plant in your border, do the same thing. Enjoy the flowers through the summer, and once you think you've got some nice shoots developing down at the base of each of these stems, cut them back down to just above that new growth, remove the old flowers and make room for the new leaves and shoots to develop up. Just one word of warning, do take care when you're pruning euphorbias. Wear some gloves and maybe some glasses or goggles as well. Euphorbias have a white sap that can be quite an irritant if it gets on your skin, so I would be careful. You don't want the sap on your skin, it could burn, it could cause blisters and so on, so be very cautious when pruning euphorbias because of that white sap. Prune carefully, long sleeves, gloves, take care when you're pruning, clean your secateurs or pruning tools afterwards, and just make sure that none of that sap gets on your skin or your face. You really can find a cranesbill for any situation around the garden, and here in this rose bed surrounding these roses I've put a fringe all the way around the bed of the bloody cranesbill. This is Geranium sanguineum, which again in early summer has got these wonderful vibrant flowers which are developing. The bees love them too, and this spreads out into a thick clump. Another variety that you'll cut down to ground level in the winter, so I'll let it die down completely in the autumn, cut all of the old growth away. In the spring it will surge up to produce these new shoots with these wonderful vibrant little flowers, adding an enchanting display and setting off the roses in this bed beautifully. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel at Adam's Gardening Guides. Thank you very much. My Dahlia Bishop of York is flowering early too. Sometimes dahlias don't start flowering till much later in the summer, but I grew this from a tuber, grew it last year, kept the tuber in a pot in my greenhouse over winter, repotted it, started it into growth, and now by the middle of June I've got a lovely display of these single open orange flowers, beautiful purplish brown foliage. Just give it a little bit of support with some stakes, keep it well watered and fed, and enjoy this flowering display with regular heading week after week after week. But another plant that you can grow in a pot is a clematis, and there are dozens and dozens of different varieties of clematis you can choose from, but the dwarf compact varieties are probably the best to choose when you're looking at something for a patio pot that you need to be reasonably self-contained. Of course, you could grow something in a pot and train it onto an archway or a trellis panel, but in a pot like this, I've chosen a little metal spiral support to train the clematis onto, to provide some extra support as it grows up and flowers. And when you're choosing these metal supports, try and choose one with plenty of horizontal or spiral supports on it. Sometimes these metal supports are very sparse and there's not many spokes to train the shoots onto, but this little one is perfect. Pushes down nicely into the pot, is nice and secure, and provides the perfect support for this compact clematis variety. This is Bijou, and isn't it beautiful? With these lovely sky blue flowers, beautiful little boss of sepals in the centre, providing some extra interest. And I love having a few clematis in pots that I can bring out and put in a prime position when they're looking their very best. Now, of course, clematis in borders could do with some support as well. If you're not training one up a pergola panel or trellis panel, then you'll need some sort of support. And my Clematis Arabella, grown at the edge of my border here in front of my neighbour's hedge, has got a nice metal spiral in here, growing up to probably 6-7 foot in height now, and I can train the growth onto this as it develops through the season to give those stems the support they need to put on that beautiful flowering display and add the extra layer of colour, height and interest to my flower borders. Many ornamental grasses grow at a real pace through spring, and by the end of spring into early summer, this beautiful Miscanthus grass, which has got lovely stripes on its leaves, has put on plenty of growth. This is actually a dwarf variety than Zabrinus. I think this one is called Summer Breeze. This is ready for putting outside on the patio to add a nice foliage feature to this display. Perhaps use this as a backdrop, back of the display, with some flowering plants towards the front. But these ornamental grasses are really worth growing. They're hardy, they're perennial, they come back year after year. The only care they need is in winter. Chop them right down at compost level, and in the spring you'll get new growth coming up from the base to put on a beautiful display of colourful new foliage. I love getting plants for free, but one plant which has just turned up in one of my borders is this lovely bellflower. I think it's called the peach-leafed bellflower. This is Campanula persicifolia. Isn't it gorgeous? Produces these tall spikes of bellflowers, which has grown up to about 3 or 4 foot now. Needed a little bit of support just to hold it upright, but they will self-seed around. So once this has finished flowering, I'm going to leave this not deadheaded, because hopefully it will form some more seed, and those seeds will self-seed in my borders, and then in future years I can enjoy some lovely displays like this as we move through summer, absolutely free. I didn't have to do a thing, and I've got some extra flowers in my borders. Isn't it lovely? Another self-seeding plant I enjoy are the foxgloves. I've got quite a few of these pop up in my borders. If I move over here to this spike here, which has nearly finished flowering, if I follow the stem down, the first flowers that developed and opened have already started forming these nice little seed pods, and these will gradually ripen up and turn brown and split. And so I'll come back to this in another video, I'm sure, but show you when these are split I can save the seed, and it is certainly worth sowing foxglove seeds fresh. As we move up the flower spike here, I've still got some flowers developing and a few more towards the tip of the shoot, and I do often just leave these to self-seed where they are in my borders. I let the seeds scatter down around the borders, and I'll get some more foxgloves coming up. Then I can dig up the seedlings and the plants and transplant them around my garden. But for now, I'm just going to enjoy not only my foxgloves, but also that lovely bellflower. And another self-seeder I've been enjoying is the Polemonium, or Jacob's ladder. This has sown itself right at the edge of my veg plot. I've got my tomatoes growing in here this summer, but I found some seedlings coming up. It's not getting in the way, so I've just left it where it is. And Polemoniums are a lovely hardy plant, not a long-lived hardy perennial, but one that will self-seed around beautifully, producing these beautiful heads of flower. And just like some of the other self-seeders, I can just let the seed pods ripen and develop on the plant, or I can save some of the seeds and sow these more deliberately in seed trays and raise young plants for planting around the garden. So it's certainly worth being a little bit cautious when you're weeding. Of course, like here in the path, I do find some weeds. I can whip these out. Got some little willow herbs cropping up in my gravel path, and you need to make sure you get them up, root and all. But sometimes you'll find something a little bit more worthwhile, and you can leave these to enjoy their flowering display. Sometimes plants tell you when they're in need of food, and that's certainly the case with this rose. We can see that the leaves themselves have got these deeper green veins, but it's pale in between. This is a symptom of what you call interveinal chlorosis. It just shows me that this rose bush is lacking the magnesium and the iron and the nutrients it needs to produce healthy leaves. So if you notice this on any of your plants, then go and get some fertiliser and give it a decent feed. As I say, it's useful just to keep an eye on the leaves of your plants, and if they're not looking pristine and green, they're showing symptoms like this, signs of nutritional deficiency, then they need some extra food. There's one thing all plants have in common, and those common needs to encourage good growth include light, or maybe some shade, water and food. Water from rain, or from irrigation systems, or you as a gardener taking control of the watering by hand, setting up an automatic watering system, whatever your garden needs. The other thing you've got to remember is feeding. Now, plants need food. If they're growing in pots and containers, the compost that you plant them into has a very low nutrient reserve. So after a few weeks, you, the gardener, must start feeding. If you're planting things in the garden, then obviously your soil will have its own intrinsic fertility. You can add organic matter to your garden soil, like your homemade compost or farm manure and other sorts of materials, and the microorganisms break that down, releasing the nutrients and improving the fertility of your soil. The other thing you can do at planting time is to mix in some additional fertiliser. Maybe it's a man-made product like Growmore, which comes in a little pelleted form, or it's an organic food, or one of the many other fertilisers and plant foods on the market. This one can be mixed in to your garden soil at planting time. Now, these have a certain amount of nutrition. Growmore traditionally is what's called a 7-7-7. It's got 7 parts of nitrogen, 7 parts of phosphate and 7 parts of potash. It will tell you on the packet, this little fertiliser panel here, exactly what is inside the box itself. Well, what does that mean? Well, plants need nitrogen to encourage good leafy growth. They need phosphates to encourage root growth, and they need potash to encourage flowering and fruiting. So as a gardener, depending what you're trying to do, encourage a plant to produce lots of leaves, or encourage it to produce good fruits and berries and flowers, then you can choose a fertiliser to suit the needs of your plant. Now, some fertilisers also contain lots of micronutrients too, so you might choose something like this. This is a liquid seaweed fertiliser, an organic product, and it's got calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, phosphorus, iron, magnesium, copper, zinc, boron, iodine, lots of nutrients in this. So I can dilute this in a watering can and make sure that my plants have a really good balance of nutrients to enjoy. So when it comes to feeding plants around your garden, check out what's available in your local garden centre. You might find general purpose foods which you can use for all sorts of things around the garden, containing that nice balance of nutrients. You might find something very specific, like I've got a soluble feed here which is just for azaleas, camellias and rhododendrons. That's perfect for all my ericaceous plants. Or for feeding the lawn, you can get a lawn food which is really high in nitrogen to encourage really good strong leafy growth. So the fertiliser mix in this, 36 of nitrogen, 6 of potash and 6 of phosphates, and a little bit of iron too, to make sure that the grass is nice and green, which encourage good lawn growth. So take a look to see what types of fertiliser you can find. And the other thing to bear in mind is the formulation. Fertilisers come formulated in different ways. They might be a granule, they might be a powder to mix into your soil. They could come as a liquid, like this liquid tomato food. And I'm very keen on using this for my tomatoes, my cucumbers, lots of my crops and flowering plants, because it's got lots of potash in it. Tomato fertilizers are high in potash, so this has actually got 4 parts nitrogen, 1.3 parts of phosphates for root growth and 6.6 parts of potash. Really good for encouraging flowers and fruit. I just add some of this to my watering can when I'm watering, and it's about 1 capful per gallon. So I usually put a couple of these into a watering can, dilute that with water, mix it up properly, and then I can use this solution of high potash tomato feed on all my crops and flowering plants. You can also get soluble plant foods which come as a powder which you've got to dilute with water. And again, with this food, what you've got to do is take a couple of scoops of this food in a watering can, dilute that with water, mix it up as you go, and you can use this all-purpose plant food all around your garden as a liquid feed, giving plants a really good drench of this solution of nutrients to ensure good strong growth. But if you find continually having to mix up watering can after watering can of these soluble feeds a bit laborious, then an alternative is to try and find one of these slow release nutrient products to mix into your compost. These usually have like a resin or a coated bead of fertiliser, and you mix them into the compost so that they dissolve slowly over the course of many months, slowly releasing their nutrients. And so at planting time, I quite often mix in a quantity, and it will tell you how much to use on the packet, mix in a quantity of this slow release fertiliser into your compost, so that when I pot up my plants, my hanging baskets, my patio pots and containers, this contains some nutrients already in it. The compost itself will only have enough nutrition to keep the plants going for a few weeks, but by mixing in a proportion of these slow release fertiliser granules, I'll know that throughout the summer, as I'm watering the plants, and while it's raining, the nutrients will be dissolving and the roots will be taking them up, and this should sustain my summer bedding displays and my patio pots right the way through the growing season. Now, if you forgot or you weren't able to mix in the slow release fertiliser at planting time, then you can get some of it, sprinkle it over the surface of your compost and just tease it into the surface, so that this will gradually be diluted when it's being watered. So whenever you're watering from the top, the fertiliser is being diluted. Or you can actually use a prong, make a little hole down into the compost itself. Get yourself a little scoop of fertiliser, pour that in, cover that up, and then whenever you're watering, that fertiliser is gradually going to dissolve and release some of its nutrients to keep this display going right the way through summer. And one little gadget I find quite useful for helping improve my efficiency feeding around the garden is one of these hose end diluters. The unit itself is attached to the hose pipe. A little container comes off the bottom, so I can just literally push that onto the hose itself. And then all I need to do is to get my packet of fertiliser. This is a water soluble feed. This one is specifically made to use with this hose end diluter. And I'll put the fertiliser into the container. I then snap the container itself, screw it on to the unit, and then the joy of this is I can either use it for watering or for feeding. It's got a little, let me just see, there we are, it's on nice and tight now. Little control on the top. I can turn it one way and it will just let water pass through. I can turn it the other way and it lets feed and water pass through. So when I push the trigger, it will release a nice mixture of fertiliser and water. I've got a shower setting, a jet setting on this, and also a flat spray. So I can use this for watering beds and borders, or I can also use it for topping up my reservoirs of water on my patio pots, adding a nice solution of feed and water at the same time, or feeding the plants on a hot day like today, just adding water to the surface of the compost, making sure that you're not wetting the leaves themselves. But this is just a simple way of making sure that whenever you water, you're feeding your plants at the same time. Thanks for watching. I hope that's given you a few fresh ideas, and if it has, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel at Adam's Gardening Guides. Thank you. If your weather forecast predicts a hot sunny day, then the first job to do in the morning is to open up your greenhouse. Temperatures in the greenhouse can really soar in the height of the summer, so getting as much ventilation as possible into the greenhouse is so important. Not only do I open up the doors to let the air come in, I've got roof vents which have got some automatic vent openers on them, so as the conditions get warmer they'll automatically open and they'll close again when conditions get cooler. I've got vents in the side, and in the end I'll get a lovely flow of air through the greenhouse, keeping conditions cooler and hopefully making sure that the plants don't suffer in the extreme heat of a hot summer day. The other thing I'm going to do is to damp down the greenhouse floor. Just get your hose and wet the floor. I've got a concrete floor, you might have some paving slabs, you might even have borders, but by wetting the floor you leave this layer of moisture, and the moisture will evaporate through the day, increasing the humidity under glass. And by providing a more humid atmosphere, it means that there's less stress on the plants to take up moisture, and they'll be happier as a result. And the other thing high humidity does is it deters a greenhouse pest called red spider mite. That's a nasty little mite that attacks the leaves and the shoots of all of your greenhouse crops. Especially I find it on aubergines and on cucumbers and peppers, and you'll get a mottled appearance on the leaf, and if you look really closely you'll see these tiny little red mites making little webs over the leaves, and as they bite into the leaf they'll leave the little discolorations, and they can completely decimate a crop and kill a plant. But they like hot, dry conditions, so by making the air more humid, it's just one of those natural things you can do to try and deter them, stop them getting hold in your greenhouse, and keep your crops healthier for longer. Down this whole sunny south facing side of the greenhouse where I'm growing my tomatoes and my cucumbers, I've got this series of pots. This is an automatic watering system called the Auto Pot. These systems of pots have got a reservoir in the bottom connected up with some pipe work which leads to a water butt at the end. All I've got to do every week or so is to top up this tank of water. Just literally fill the tank up completely, and the water will just flow from this tank into the trays at the bottom, the green trays. They've got a little float system in them, which as the water fills up, the float raises, turns the water flow off, the plants use the water, the float drops down, and when the water in the tray at the bottom has been used up, it opens up the valve again and fills up and keeps the system self-watering. So I reckon this tank of water here will probably supply the plants here for a really good week, 10 days, sometimes even 2 weeks. At the height of the summer, when the plants are fully grown and it's a really hot day, maybe I've got to top this tank up maybe once a week, but certainly will keep the plants watered every day without me needing to do too much at all. And all I do is add some liquid feed, something like Tomarite or tomato fertilizer, and when I top the tank up with water, literally I add some of this at the same time. So I've got a lovely liquid high potash feed, which is what my crops really want, and that keeps the plants watered and fed automatically. Just takes the daily chore, one of those daily chores off me. Plants growing in individual pots and trays can be watered by hand. Just means you can give individual plants the individual water they need. But when you've got a lot of plants in the greenhouse, like I've got some strawberry plants here, I've got these in trays, I can just put some water in the top of each pot, let that drain down, and leave a reservoir of water in the base for the plants to take up from the bottom on hot days. The other thing you can do is to make a slightly more automated system. This tray, plastic tray, comes with a metal shelf, and if you use a piece of capillary matting, get this at garden centres or mail order suppliers, I'll lay this on top of the tray. I'll make a little wick dipping the edge of the capillary matting down into the base, and keeping that base full of water means that there's a massive reservoir, many pints of water in there. The wick takes the water up, keeps the matting damp, and then I can just keep things like my pots of strawberries on this matting, and they've got, again, their own reservoir of water, their own little mini automatic watering system. And the other thing that happens is you get moisture evaporating from this matting during the day, increases humidity, reduces the stress and water on the plants themselves, and also, as I said before, high humidity means less red spider mite around the greenhouse. My outdoor tomatoes have established really well, and now we get round to early summer, it's just a matter of some regular activity, maybe a few times a week. What I'm doing is I'm going around the plants and I'm looking for any little side shoots, and if I find any of these, I will pinch them out. You'll usually find side shoots developing on the main stem where a leaf joins on. And when I'm growing tomatoes as single stemmed cordons like these are, not as bush varieties, but as one single stem, what I want is to remove any side shoots. I don't want lots of bushy growth, just want that main stem developing flowers and fruits. The other thing I'm doing is I'm training my plants onto these spiral metal supports which have been pushed firmly down into the ground. So all I tend to do is every few days, when you've got new growth at the tip of the shoot, just literally wind it on so that it holds in place, supports the main stem, stops it flopping, supports the crop as it develops. Now, in addition to training your tomatoes, remember that they'll need water. Depending on what the weather conditions are like, I'm out here maybe once a week in the early part of the summer, if the weather isn't too hot, just giving each plant a really good drench of water, so that the water really does soak down into the root zone, and it will encourage those plant roots to grow down deeply. As we move through to high summer, conditions are getting warmer, then these plants are going to need watering more regularly. Might be something I'll do perhaps every 2 or 3 days, giving the plants a really thorough water. What you don't want to do is just go around the bed just giving each plant a little bit. All you're then doing is wetting the soil surface and encouraging weeds to grow. Give each plant a really thorough drench. Hold the hose gun nearby, soak it on, let the water soak down. Maybe do a second plant. Once that water's soaked away on the first, go back to it and give it some more water. Really good thorough watering more infrequently is better than just sprinkling water around every day. And obviously, if you've got the sun out on a hot day, you don't want to be wetting the leaves of your tomatoes and outdoor plants, because the sun can capture those little water drops and act like a magnifying glass, burning the leaves themselves. So try and water the soil rather than the plants, water thoroughly rather than infrequently, and give the plants a really good drench. In addition to the watering, I'm going to mix up some high potash tomato feed in a watering can and give each of these plants a really good drench of liquid feed, probably every couple of weeks through the summer. That high potash feed means it's going to encourage more flowers to develop, and potash is a nutrient which plants need to develop really good tasty fruits too. So high potash tomato feed, good watering, pinching training. I'm going to look forward to a thoroughly big crop of tomatoes to pick later in the summer. Just in front of my greenhouse, I've got post and wire support with some hybrid cane fruits and blackberries on it. So I've got posts at either end of the row, horizontal wires about a foot apart all the way down, and from this end of the row I've got a Tayberry, I've got a Loganberry, and down at this end a thornless blackberry. Now, one of the first fruits to develop in my garden is the Tayberry, and I've already got some fruits ripening up. Flowering is just about over on this, and the fruits are swelling and developing, so I'll get my earliest pickings from the Tayberry. Then the Loganberry, again, flowering is just about over and fruits are swelling. But down at this end, the Blackberry has got masses of flowers, and this will go on flowering and therefore develop a succession of fruits for picking right the way through into autumn. So I'm going to be picking these fruits and enjoying them. And I've got the new canes developing, which are going to carry flowers and fruits next year at the same time. So last year's canes carrying fruit now. Once those are finished, I'll prune them away. But I've got new canes coming up, which are going to be carrying fruit next year, so I will train these in. But for now, I must go and get something and start picking some of these delicious fruits. I've only had my bee box outside for an hour or so, and I've already got insects flying around looking at the little holes drilled in the wood and the hollow canes, and they're exploring. Some of these are solitary bees, just trying to see whether or not these little hollow canes or drilled holes could be the perfect place to lay their eggs. So it's certainly worth hanging some of these little insect hotels, bee hotels, whatever you want to call them, around your garden, and see whether or not they might attract some bees, the solitary ones, the red mason bee or the leafcutter bees, into your garden to make a home in one of these little hotels, lay their eggs, raise some new young, and build up a new population of bees around your garden. Isn't it lovely to see just a simple idea like this creating a habitat that your garden insects can enjoy? And a simple bee box or insect home is very easy to make. I made this one just getting some untreated timber, which I made a simple box with. Any size or shape of box is absolutely fine. And then I've got some either bits of garden cane, or these are actually some old pieces of lovage stem that I harvested when I cut the lovage down in the autumn. I've just saved these, and these have got nice hollow structure, so I can cut them into pieces and just push them into the box itself. There's a solid back to the box itself, and the box is probably about 6 inches or so deep. And I've got some bits of wood, some old branches from a tree which I've cut down and drilled holes in them, probably about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 millimeters across, different size holes, just to try and make sure that we're providing the right sort of habitat for the bees to explore and then go into and lay their eggs. So a very simple box like this is something you could hopefully knock up yourself. Just get the wood, back, top, bottom and sides, just hammer it together with some nails, fill it from bottom to top with hollow canes, and hopefully this will become a habitat for your garden bees to enjoy. When I've hung this on my garden arch in previous years, I've had the lovely red mason bee in and out of the hollow canes laying its eggs. It's a lovely sight to see, and certainly makes building a box like this very worthwhile. I only hung this pheromone trap in my fruit tree last week. This is a codling moth trap, and inside is a glue card and a little capsule of pheromone giving off the scent of the female codling moth. And I've already got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've already got about a dozen moths trapped on that card. And by trapping the male moths, hopefully they haven't had a chance to mate with the females. So the females will be flying around but not laying any eggs, which will be eating my apple crops. So I think it's worth hanging these pheromone traps in your fruit trees from around about the middle to the end of May. Replace the pheromone capsule in the card when necessary, and you can buy refills for these sorts of traps, and that hopefully will mean that these apples which are developing on my tree here won't have maggots burrowing into them and eating out the centre, so I should get a healthy crop. You can also buy pheromone traps for plum trees too, so if you've got plums in your garden and you want to keep those maggot free, then check out and buy a plum moth trap. Works in the same sort of way. Hang it in your tree and it will keep your crops hopefully pest free without the need to spray. Some of my apples producing a really good crop of fruit, but in many ways too many. There is something called June drop, which means that earlier in the summer, if some of the fruits didn't pollinate properly, they fall to the ground. And June drop means quite often underneath apple trees you find a range of little baby apples that have just dropped off the tree completely. But sometimes an apple sets too many fruits, and if you're too greedy, in other words, if you leave all these fruits to develop, all you'll get is lots of small apples. And I usually want slightly bigger ones to eat, and I'd rather have fewer apples but bigger apples, really decent size eating apples. So if you do find that you've got fruits close together, maybe thin out every other one. Leave a couple of fruits on there, it's okay. I've got a little group here, 3 fruits together, that's too many. I'm going to thin that down to at least 2. Again here I've got 1 fruit and then 2 together. I'm going to take 1 out, just space the fruits out. Again here I've got 3 fruits developing. I'm going to take 1 of those out. As I say, don't be too greedy. I know it seems a little bit of a waste, but really take my word, if you left all these in place, all you'll end up is tiny little apples. So thin out, maybe leave 2 maybe in some places, maybe just leave one in others, but certainly don't leave groups of 3 fruits. That's far too many. There we have it, a few things to do to keep your garden looking good, provide the extra colour and interest you want, look after the crops and the fruits, and really enjoy your garden to the full through the summer months. Thanks for joining me at Adam's Gardening Guides. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll be producing more gardening videos for you very soon.